Today's story isn't just about love. It's about truth, loss, and what betrayal does to a human soul. Sometimes real pain doesn't scream. It sits quietly and changes who we become. Jova Rahman, 19 years old, first-year international student from a modest family. Leon Fisher, 22 years old, third-year business student from a wealthy Berlin family. Amelie von Hartmann, 23 years old, art student and only daughter of an old industrial family. Introduction. Jova arrived in Berlin with one suitcase, a second-hand coat, and a scholarship letter that still smelled like the envelope glue. She had learned the city from maps before she learned it with her feet. The name sounded like doors. Unter den Linden, Friedrichstrasse, Museum Island. Each street folded into the next like pages in a book she promised herself she would finish. She moved into a shared dorm in Adlershof, where the hallway smelled like detergent and ambition. She told herself that hunger was only a kind of focus, and that the future could be built the way meals are built, one honest ingredient at a time. Leon walked into her life inside a small cafe in Kreuzberg, where she worked evening shifts to pay for bread, books, and the thin line between both. He arrived with classmates and a voice trained by private schools to sound calm in every room. He noticed things other people missed, but only the things that interested him. People looked at him even when he said nothing. He had a habit of turning toward windows, as if the city were a mirror he liked. Amelie existed at first like a rumor about winter coats and gallery openings, a name Jova saw in captions, and in the careful smiles of men who believed their children were weather patterns. She was not Jova's enemy. She was what happens when money is old enough to forget it is money. The first day. On her second week in the city, Jova learned how to stack saucers without noise, how to greet tourists in a handful of languages, and how to smile with her eyes when her cheeks were tired. Frau Keller, the owner, showed her how to polish the brass register and said that kindness is a habit and not a costume, and that even a busy room can hear the difference. Leon came in at closing time, asked for a small espresso, and paid with coins that had no right to look elegant. He asked about her accent and did not guess wrong on his third try. He listened as if it were work. He returned 2 days later and left a note on the receipt that said thank you for the music, then wrote the name of the song she had been humming without knowing it had a name. He returned again and again until the sound of the bell over the door felt like a line in a familiar song. Two worlds learning the same street. They explored Berlin at different heights. Leon knew the rooftops where people watched sunsets with the confidence of owners. Jova knew the sidewalks where mornings began with bread and ended with tired feet. He taught her the stained glass inside a quiet church near Gendarmenmarkt. She taught him the fast path from the S-Bahn to the university library that saved 3 minutes in cold weather. He spoke about restaurants like they were theaters. She spoke about kitchens like they were engines. They ate together in rooms where the bread was described in careful sentences. Leon ordered without looking at prices and told stories about summers in Sylth that sounded like postcards. Jova listened and let the pictures live where they lived best. She paid attention to the way servers moved, to the silent choreography that made a crowded room feel like an orchestra. She loved how a perfect plate could make a stranger kinder. The first lie. Leon told her he needed to visit his grandmother. He canceled a weekend without meeting her eyes. She told herself not to be afraid of being reasonable. She worked extra hours and learned how to clean an espresso machine like a violin. On Sunday, a friend sent a photo from a glossy page. Leon appeared in a suit beside a tall woman in navy, with a caption that placed them at a gallery opening in Düsseldorf. The photograph was careless. The angle was unkind. The truth beneath it was simple. Jova called. He did not answer. She texted a small question. He wrote back with a larger excuse. "It is complicated," he said. She did not know that complicated can be a very clean word, a word people use to hide that a choice was already made. Meeting Emily. A week later, Amelie walked into the cafe carrying Winter like a scarf. She recognized Leon across the room before she recognized the shape of her own reflection in the glass. Jova watched them greet each other. She felt the city tilt a degree. On a sidewalk afterward, Leon said the families had expectations. He used the word expectations the way people use umbrellas, even when the rain is caused by their own weather. Jova kept working. She counted the day in orders and in the coins that felt heavy at night. Her scholarship was safe. Her grades were good. She was building something that had nothing to do with tuxedos or captions. The last conversation. He returned 2 days after the caption appeared. He stood at the counter and looked like a person who wanted to be told that the past could be returned like a shirt. "Tell me the truth," she said. "My father asked me to consider it," he replied. "It is bigger than me. I never meant to hurt you." "You meant to have both," she said. He played like someone who has been correctly named. He said he loved her. He said he could not break everything. She said that meant he loved how he felt when he was with her, not the life she would be forced to stand in while he kept both worlds. He left a tip. She pushed it into the staff jar without ceremony. She finished her shift. She went home and wrote 3 words on a scrap of paper. Work, save, learn. The years when she worked. Jova decided to measure time in recipes and in pages, not in what if. She asked for more hours and learned every station in the small cafe. She memorized suppliers and the seasonality of every ingredient she could afford. She watched how regulars returned for kindness that did not look like performance. She built a small savings account with a name that made her smile. She called it Kitchen. She left the cafe for a small bistro in Newcombe when the owner promised she would not be invisible. There she learned to cost plates to the cent and to train staff without stealing their dignity. She learned to tell a polite guest that a chair was needed for someone who could not stand. She learned to keep the dishwasher running during an argument in the dining room. She learned that a menu is a voice and that prices are sentences that must tell the truth. She added a morning job at a bakery that needed a manager who could count and also smile at 5 in the morning. She proofed dough in darkness, and by 9, she was handing over the line at the bistro with flour still on her sleeves. She walked home some nights instead of taking the train because the city at midnight can help a person arrange the furniture in their mind. She did not date. She did not punish herself either. She bought a better pair of shoes. She replaced the chipped mug that made coffee taste like memory. She sent money home every month. She started a private notebook called Someday with lists of plates she wanted to serve and a simple rule at the top. Coffee first, kindness always. A door with her name. The bistro's landlord raised the rent beyond reason, and the owner decided to close with dignity. On the last night, the staff lifted glasses and promised to stay in touch. The owner called Jova a week later and told her about a tiny space near Maybeshufer that was coming open. It was small, poorly lit, and almost perfect. It was also almost impossible. Jova built a plan that could stand on its own legs. She combined her savings with a small loan from a microfinance program for women starting businesses. She learned about permits. She signed papers that made her hands shake. She told her mother on a slow video call that the walls were ugly but honest. Her mother told her to paint them the color of mourning. She cleaned until the place smelled like effort. Friends helped paint. A neighbor lent her a step ladder. She bought second-hand chairs she would sit in herself. She wrote the menu by hand on paper that could be changed without drama. Every item had a story and a price that would not humiliate anyone at the register. On the day she opened, 3 people walked in. On the second day, 6. On the third, the mail carrier came for lunch and left a review in person because he did not trust computers with important opinions. She wrote his birthday down in the private list on her phone. On his birthday, she handed him a slice of lemon tart without a speech. He told everyone on his route that the place had a memory. A small paragraph on a local blog brought a line that wrapped once around the corner. People said they could taste attention in the food. They took photos that looked quiet. They returned because the room felt like a place where a person did not have to be interesting to be welcome. There was a small shelf of books by the window. There was a hook for a regular's cane. There was a notice near the till that said water is free. There was no slogan on the wall. The name over the door was simple: Jova. The day he returned. 3 years after the wedding, on a rain-washed Tuesday, Leon and Amelie came in without a reservation. They looked like people who had learned to carry their names with care. The host sat them in a small corner. Jova saw them and decided not to hide. She carried menus to their table and said welcome with exactly the same voice she used with everyone. Amelie recognized the quality of the room in the first minute. She leaned toward the candle as if to signal respect. She ordered without discussing the price and asked a question about the soup that proved she had eaten carefully for a very long time. Leon studied the menu and then looked up, eyes asking for a private minute that Jova could not spare. They ate. They said little. When Jova checked on them, Amelie said the lemon tart understood memory. Jova thanked her. Leon kept his eyes on the plate. At the end, he asked for a moment in the small hallway near the coat rack. 5 minutes, she said, not more. He said he was wrong. He said he thought he could build a life like a table set for 2 rooms and that he could sit at both without tipping a glass. He said he told himself it was complicated. He said it was simply cowardice. He said she owed him nothing, but he owed her many sentences. He would keep it short. She let him finish. The restaurant breathed. She told him to live well with the regret, to let it make him kinder, to make it feed him and not her. He asked if she was happy and then winced at his own question. She said she was busy and that happiness happened inside busy like salt dissolved in water. They returned to the table. Amelie asked for 2 tarts to go and 4 loaves of tomorrow's bread if the kitchen could spare them. Jova said yes and named a pickup time as if this were what the 3 of them had always been for. The long after. People in Berlin talk. The restaurant filled because critics enjoy telling their friends a secret that is not quite a secret. Jova trained a manager and a sous chef and learned how to step back without vanishing. She opened a second location across the river 2 years later and watched it grow its own personality. A newspaper called her a self-made millionaire because numbers make certain readers pay attention. She nodded for the camera with her staff and then stood where the light fell on them instead. She walked home late and sometimes sat on a bench by the river to listen to the city hum. She kept a small apartment with a table that fit 2 plates and a window that faced a tree. She visited her mother and brought a coat that could argue with German weather and wind. She answered staff messages faster than she answered the kind of messages that pretend to be invitations but are really tests. She dated once or twice and learned that she could enjoy a kind person and still choose to eat alone without calling it loss. The university asked her to speak. She stood at a lectern and talked about recipes and rent and staffing, and the way respect shows up in small daily acts. A student asked if revenge tasted good. She said she did not serve revenge. She said it curdles on the plate. She said the point was not to punish anyone. The point was to build rooms where you can breathe. Another student asked if she forgave Leon. She said yes. She said forgiveness is like a kitchen tool. You use it so bitterness does not infect the dish. It does not mean you invite the same person to the pass. It does not mean you let them sign the menu. Later, she wrote in her notebook that work is how the heart cools without going cold. She wrote that the city had taught her to count blessings without turning them into debt. She wrote that she wanted to remain the kind of owner who remembers the name of the person who cleans the hood as easily as the name of the food critic. A quiet visit. Leah returned once more, years later, alone. He stood in line like everyone else, bought bread, and when he reached the counter, he said that he had done one thing right. He had married someone he respected. "That is worth a lot," Jova said. He asked about her. She said she had married her work. He smiled in a way that let her know he had finally learned what that sentence meant. He left with the loaves under his arm. The door closed and the room returned to its usual sound. What the city remembers. Berlin remembered the restaurant the way cities remember places that teach them to be kinder to themselves. The mail carrier still came on his birthday for lemon tart that did not need an announcement. Families brought children to learn what patience feels like in a small line. Students argued about poems under the window. A woman from the neighborhood read her morning paper at the same table and cried once when her husband died. Staff kept her coffee warm and her plate small until she found a way to go home. No one told the story with villains and saints because the room itself refused that shape. People still whispered at the corner table, asking if the owner was really the girl who had come to Germany with one suitcase and a stubborn heart. The staff shrugged and said the owner is the owner and refilled the water for free. Closing every night. Jova closed each night with the same small ritual. She stood for a moment at the pass, hands on the edge, and breathed. She listened to the hum of the refrigerators and the low talk of staff stacking chairs. She said goodnight to the line as if it were a person. She wiped an imaginary mark from the brass register because it felt right to say tomorrow this way. On the anniversary of opening day, she left the restaurant through the front door instead of the back. She turned and looked at the letters of her name above the glass. They were small, not proud. She liked that. She locked the door and put the key in her pocket, like a promise to the person she had been when she was 19 and hungry in all the useful ways. Epilogue of ordinary light. There were no fireworks in her story. There was no scene where music swelled while an old hurt asked for a last dance. There was a morning when fresh bread steamed on the counter and a child pressed both hands against the glass in delight. There was an afternoon when a new hire learned how to carry 3 plates without fear. There was an evening when a couple paid their bill with coins and apologized for the noise of counting, and Jova smiled and said that the room was built for that sound. Once on a quiet Sunday, she walked past a small church near Gendarmenmarkt and stepped inside to rest her feet. Colored light lay across the floor in neat squares. She thought of a boy who used to turn toward windows, of a woman who taught her that money can be quiet or loud, and of a city that had made space for a girl who refused to shrink. She sat for a moment, then rose and crossed the square toward the market, where she still liked to choose lemons by weight in her palm. Lessons without slogans. If someone asked what the story teaches, she would answer plainly. Do not let someone else define your worth, and then pay rent inside their opinion. If a promise cannot survive a simple question, treat it like smoke. Learn a craft that makes the day feel honest. Spend your first bid money on shoes that protect your back. Feed people without asking them to earn it. Let regret turn into fuel for the work and not into poison for your heart. When you have more than you need, be quiet about it and generous in ways that cannot be photographed. She did not say these things often. She preferred to put them on plates. The last image. Snow fell one night and made the street sound like an old record. Jova stood by the window after closing and watched a couple share a scarf and disappear around the corner. The kitchen lights glowed on steel and tile. The lemon tarts in the glass case looked like small suns that had decided to live on Earth. She turned off the last switch in the room, sighed the way rooms do when they are ready to sleep. She stepped outside, locked the door, and tucked the key into her pocket. The sign above her head did not claim anything it could not keep. It said only her name. She walked toward the river, the city soft with snow, her breath a small cloud that did not need translation. She had built a life she could live inside. She had learned that love can betray you and still teach you how to stay. And when the city asked each morning what she was serving, she answered the same way, plated simply and priced fairly. Coffee first, kindness always. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe my channel.